One of my favorite things to do as a kid, I don't know if this was your experience, but one of my favorite things to do when I was a kid was to sit outside at night and watch the stars. I loved to do that. I just have really good memories of that. Anytime we would hear about a meteor shower that was predicted or coming, and my mom and I would go and we would put on, a lot of jackets and coats, and then we would grab a bunch of blankets and some pillows, and we would go lay out in our grass. We would pick like a really dark, cold, clear night. Like those are the best nights when there's no moon and it's just super, super clear. When the colder it is, the clearer it is, it seems like. And we would lay on the ground and we would count shooting stars. Like I just have a great memory of that. Well, one evening in particular, we were doing this, and we were, trying to pay attention and to watch, and I loved looking at the Milky Way, as it, came across the sky. And it was like the darker it got, the more your eyes adjusted and the more stars you could see. And we lived kind of out where there weren't, it wasn't a big city or anything, so you could see real well. And so, but one evening we were laying there, and I kid you not, we saw something just like this. And this isn't like a zoomed in image of like a little streak in the sky. Okay, that's actually that's the size that it looked like to us. We didn't take a picture. This isn't ours. But it was this fireball coming across the sky. And I still have this very clear memory. This is, at least 5 years ago when I was a little kid. And it came across the sky, and we couldn't hear anything, okay? But we could literally see debris and smoke trailing off the back of this meteor. It literally looked like it was going to land in our neighbor's yard. We saw it kind of coming across the tops of the trees. That's how close it felt. And once we kind of gathered ourselves, and realized that it wasn't going to land in our neighbor's yard, our response to that was, "Oh my goodness, did you just see that? Wow, did you see it? What in the world was that, and where did it come from?" We were in awe of what had just happened. We couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable. And the reason that we responded that way after we had gotten over, the immediate reaction, which is, fear and all of that, but we had a moment where we could actually reflect on what had just happened, okay? And it's because as human beings, we have what we would call the gift of wonder. It is the ability to wonder about things, to wonder and to have curiosity about things, to be able to ask questions, to think about things. Do you realize that we're the only living creatures on the planet that really have the ability to do this? Not to just learn and to react and to respond and to, naturally do things because it's kind of built in, but to actually respond and react and then to go, "I wonder why that happened. I wonder what that's about." It's our ability to think about things differently. It's our ability to see things from new perspectives, to be able to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and to go, "I wonder what they think about this. I wonder how they feel." It's the way that we can process things and wonder and come up with new possibilities and new ideas and new approaches to things. It's wonder really opens our eyes to the realm of possibility, to what could be and what perhaps should be in our lives. That's what wonder does. Wonder just causes us to be creative. It's what causes us to invent new ways of doing things. It's why you look at things and you think, "I wonder if I could fix that," or "I wonder if I could, if we put this and this together, then we might get this." What has happened just in the last, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years is so unbelievable when you consider how far we've come. But the things that we couldn't do then that we can do now is unbelievable. It's because we have this gift within us. This creative gift, this ability to think about things and then to think about it in a new way. And to wonder and to imagine the possibilities. To imagine the possibilities for your future and for your kids' future and what it could be like and what it should be like. And it is seen best, I think, during holiday seasons, especially in the unbelievable expectation and anticipation of a child, isn't it? Aren't children so good at wondering? Like they wonder about things. It's why, the inquisitive little 4-year-old, the stage that my boys are in right now, it's just why. And it is an endless series of why questions. And it's not cliche. They actually do this. And it drives me crazy. I cannot answer it well enough not to be followed by, but why? Why do you do that? Well, because I need to do that. Well, why do you need to do that? Well, it is constant. And kids are just so good at this. And especially during the holiday season, especially the Christmas season, right? It's why we say that Christmas is really the most wonderful time of the year because it's so full of wonder. As decorations start going up and people start, dressing in really nice sweaters, and they start looking amazing, and the hot chocolate starts brewing, everything smells like cinnamon for some reason, and somehow that got associated in my mind, with Christmas, and, the weather gets cooler, and the music, and, the sights and the sounds, and all of those things, especially when you're a kid, just produces intense wonder. And there's such anticipation and expectation of what is to come, and such excitement. And then what happens? We get old, right? We get older and wiser, and what was wonderful, is now just kind of familiar and normal, right? It doesn't quite inspire us the way it once did. It doesn't move us the way it once did. It doesn't cause us to think and to react and to wonder because it's become really familiar to us. All of the parts of the Christmas story, we think about these things during the Christmas season because it's only contained in just a couple of the Gospels where it's really talked about specifically. And so it's like, it's just such a short section of Scripture, and yet it, is so incredibly powerful, but it's become familiar, and so it's kind of lost some of its wonder for us. It doesn't inspire us like it once did, We hear it and we read it, and it's not a big deal. And that's kind of the natural process when it comes to certain things, right? You think about like your new clothes, especially as a young person, you go out and you get to go shopping and you buy all the new clothes and you literally cannot wait. You are like bursting with anticipation for like the first time you've ever, wanted to go to school because you've got your new clothes and you want to put on your new clothes. And even as adults, like if we're being honest, like we like to put on our new clothes, right? And go out and put on but then what happens, a few months pass, a few years pass, and those aren't new clothes anymore, and they don't quite inspire you the way they once did, and they ultimately find their way into like a garbage bag on their way to Goodwill. That's what those new clothes do. What once inspired you, what once just gave you such wonder and anticipation now is just, somebody else's fodder, right? Or that new car, right? The new car, the new car that had the new car smell and you didn't have to buy it, and put it in your car and hang it on a little tree. It just smells like a new car because it is a new car and it looks like a new car and you want it to stay a new car and you've got new rules all of a sudden for your new car. And you just want to go sit in your new car. You don't even have anywhere to go. You just want to sit. I'm driving, anywhere you go. You'd like the new car. And then eventually the new car becomes not new anymore, right? And it gets a little dinged up and a little bit old, and your kids spill a little milk, and it never smells the same, ever. You know what I'm talking about? And it just loses something. It just becomes like another payment that you have, right? And it doesn't quite inspire you. It's just familiar. And here's the thing. When it comes to your new clothes and your new car and things like that, it's fine. That is the normal progression. That is how we work. We familiarize ourselves, and so as we become more familiar, we become indifferent. It's just the way it works. We become more and more indifferent. But the concern, and the reason for this series, the concern is that what about when we apply this to how we wonder about God? What about as it relates to our desire to wonder about God? What if, especially during a season like this, we become so familiar, so overly familiar, because it's cultural, because it's something we've grown up with, it's something we've always believed. What if we get so familiar that we forget to really be in wonder about the God of the universe? What if He is just like our old clothes, and it just doesn't really move us anymore? We don't get real excited about the idea anymore. It's just old hat. I just wonder, and here's kind of the reason that we're doing this, and the reason for this series is because this is the concern. When we lose our sense of wonder about God, we'll miss Him altogether. That's my concern. When we lose our sense of wonder about who God is and what God is like, then we will miss him altogether. We will. And I don't want that to happen. And so my hope for this series and over the next few weeks together as we lead up to Christmas Eve is that I can incite wonder in all of us once again. Just inspire us just a little bit to consider this gift of wonder that we have and apply it to something that has become incredibly familiar to us. Nobody's introduced us to God for the first time and said, well, let me introduce you to the creator of the universe. Oh, wow, did you see that? Where did that come from? Nobody's thinking that as the Christmas season rolls around. And as we argue on Facebook with people about keeping Christ in Christmas, and that becomes our big thing, and yet we ourselves aren't real inspired by Christ in Christmas at all. And I wonder if we couldn't get back to a place of thinking that way, of leaning in God's direction, of considering these things again, because I don't want us to miss God. I don't want us to miss God. I want us to wonder once again about God. And so here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to spend a little bit of time kind of on the front end here. And over the next few weeks, we're actually going to dig in a little bit to the Christmas story and look at some of the characters and some of the things that happen. But today, I want to start by looking at something that John actually said, because he spent a lot of time with Jesus. He spent the last few years of Jesus' life, he spent with his disciples, and John was one of these guys, and he knew him very well. And he makes some claims during, that become extremely relevant and extremely evident in the Christmas story that matter so much. We're going to start by looking at this very foundational element, one of the most foundational things. We're going to forget everything else for now, but underlying it, and you've probably kind of forgotten this, the most incredible underlying piece of information that we have about the Christmas story is this: that God came down to us. That is the most fundamental idea that happens in the Christmas story, is that God came down to us. And I say that, and I bet nobody goes, oh, wow, I've never heard that before. Where did that come from? Nobody's thinking, oh my goodness. And yet that is such a huge concept. And if you're in here today and you're thinking, well, that's the very thing that I'm not real sure I do believe, and you're a little skeptical, well, here's what you have to know. Why we believe as Christians, why we believe that God actually came down to us, that is a true statement. Because there were eyewitnesses who wrote the stories down that we then tell. They weren't just guys who, a couple of hundred years later had heard oral tradition and heard these stories told over and over again, or they grew up, and these were guys, that's what we do. That's all we have to go on here at church, right? But we're banking on the idea that these guys were eyewitnesses because of the claims that they make and the way that they say things and the way that they piece these stories together and the details that they don't leave out. Like what cowards they were when Jesus was put to death. And how they didn't believe. Those are things you would leave out of the story if you were actually wanting people to believe your story, right? I mean, you want them, you would kind of write yourself, you're making it up, you're going to write yourself in as the hero. And yet none of these guys were heroes, and they knew that. And so John says, no, we are eyewitnesses to these events. And so this is why we're writing them down, because I don't want you to miss what really happened. I don't want you to miss God. I don't want you to miss it. John was one of these guys who spent a lot of time with Jesus. He was there with him at his death. He was even at the foot of the cross when Jesus was being crucified. And do you know why he actually believed that this statement is true? It wasn't because Jesus lived necessarily. It wasn't necessarily even because of his miracles. And it wasn't because he was crucified. It was because he stood and looked into an empty tomb where Jesus was buried and he wasn't there. And so he became fully and absolutely convinced that this is true, that God actually came down to us in a way that nobody was expecting, in a way that nobody was assuming would happen. Nobody expected God, the God of the universe, to show up in this way. They had been waiting for a couple of thousand years for promises to be fulfilled. They were waiting on a promised one. They were waiting on a Messiah to come and save Israel, and yet everybody missed it, except a very few folks who got close. Everybody missed it because they didn't know what they were looking for. They were looking for the wrong thing. They weren't expecting God to come down to us. They were always expecting, especially in first, kind of the ancient world, first century world, they were expecting always that we had to get to God, that it was us going to God. What do I have to do? What kind of sacrifices do I have to make? What do I have to say? What kind of rituals do I have to perform in order to get to God? And yet, in this, it's God came to us. And so many people weren't looking in the right place, and they had lost the wonder about God and their relationship with Him. They had lost the idea because it's been so long. It's been hundreds of years. We're very familiar with all the promises, but we still missed it. We missed it because we weren't looking in the right place. And I don't want us to miss it. John doesn't want us to miss it. So now John is an old man, and he had been talking about it so much that eventually he actually got imprisoned. He got exiled to the island of Patmos. Emperor Domitius was just like, I'm done with you, and I'm not going to kill you because I've tried that, and every time I kill one, it's like 5 or 10 others seem to pop up out of the woodwork, and so I'm not going to kill you. I'm just going to exile you and limit your influence. Well, John begins to write these words down, and listen to what he says. He says, the Word, being Jesus, the Word, he describes that as Jesus, became flesh and made His dwelling among us. The God of the universe, here is what is so substantial. Here is what is amazing. I've looked and I've spent time with Jesus, and I've lived my life now after Jesus was gone, and I've watched what has taken place and the things that He predicted that have now begun to come true. And as I look back, what is so significant, the way, if I had to summarize it, I would summarize it this way: God came down and He put on flesh. And He tabernacled is another way to interpret that word, made His dwelling, or lived among, or pitched His tent in order to live with us, like us. And we have seen His glory. We as in, not just John, we not like collectively as in us, because it doesn't include us. The we is talking about the people who actually saw these things. It was James and John and Matthew and Peter. These were the guys. We've seen it. We've witnessed it. We've spent time with it. We saw what He has done. We've heard what He said. We have seen His glory, the uniqueness of His life, and the things that He has done. The glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Jesus came, and He said, this is what was so significant. God came down to us. That was the difference. I'm telling you, God came down to us. And here's what my question would be for each one of you. Have you wondered recently whether or not this is actually true? I mean, this is kind of where it begins. This is why we celebrate Christmas. This is why Christ is the reason for the season. This is it, because God came to us. It's significant, and we celebrate it, and it inspires us. It causes us to wonder, if you really think about it. But I wonder, have you wondered about this lately? Have you wondered as to whether or not this is really true? Because my question really is, what if it is? What if this is true? Should it not have a significant impact on your life if this is true? But you're never going to discover anything unless you begin to ask questions. You're never going to, and Christians, get hung up on this all the time because we think, if I ask questions, then that suggests that either I doubt or I don't know something. And guess what? Both are true. We all have a little bit of doubt within us, and there's a bunch of things that we all don't know. And so we should be asking questions. And so if you want to begin waking up to wonder once again, like just inspiring yourself to wonder again, begin by asking questions. Begin by asking questions like this. Have I even wondered about the fact that God came down to us? That he didn't leave it in our hands to try to get to him, but he came down to us. Have you wondered? So as we open this up, I want to look at a quick passage that John records. And it's a conversation that Jesus has with his disciples just before he's to be crucified. So now this is on the other end of his life, okay? And so he's an old man now. He grew up in the home of a carpenter. And after the events of the nativity, the Christmas story, we don't have a whole lot of information about his life, and it's because everybody kind of forgot. Everybody sort of forgot what was really going on, that God had come to earth. And while it was celebrated by a few in those early days of his childhood, everybody kind of forgot and went about their business and didn't realize that God was right among them, that God was actually dwelling in their midst, and they forgot. They didn't see it. They missed it. And so later in life, Jesus is preparing to leave, and he's actually telling them, he's saying, hey, guys, guess what? Getting ready to go. Getting ready to leave, but don't worry. And they're all thinking, are you kidding me? Don't worry. How are we not going to worry? You're leaving. We're not in good shape if you go. Because they don't want to do anything to us because they're a little scared of you. But once you're not here, what's going to happen to us? We're not the most popular people right now in the best ways. And so, yeah, we're going to worry. And Jesus is saying, no, don't worry because I'm going. Chapter 14, the beginning of chapter 14, this is where Jesus is describing, and he's saying, look, I'm going to go, and I'm going to go to my Father, and I'm going to prepare many rooms for you, and we say, prepare mansions, however we interpret that, and I'm going to prepare a place for you, and you know the way to the Father, and so I'm just going to go and get ready. And they're all thinking, what does this mean? What in the world is going on? And of course, there's a little confusion, and they're a little perplexed. I don't understand what's going on. You need to help us. And so a couple of the disciples are thinking, you need to help us out here. Give us a little more information. And so they ask a couple of questions, couple of probing statements, and they want to know from Jesus, help us understand this. And Thomas is one of the first to speak up. And Thomas says to Jesus, Lord, we don't know. We don't know where you are going. So how can we know the way? It's like, Jesus, hold up. I'm confused. I got a question. We don't understand. We don't really, you're saying you're going to go somewhere and you're going to the Father and we know the way. And I'm just telling you, we don't even know where you're going or what you're talking about, so we don't know the way. And Jesus responds this way, I am the way. I am the way. He's saying, hold on. You say you don't know the way, but I'm telling you, I am the way. And so you know me, therefore you do know the way. Because I am the way. It's a significant statement. He says, I am the way, and I'm the truth, and I'm the life. And then get this, he says, no one comes to the Father except through me. I am how you get to the Father. And that's a very narrow statement, is it not? And I mean, this is the hang up for so many. I mean, if you're skeptical about Christianity, this may be your thing. It's how do we know we're right? Or how could it be so narrow, and so that's an offensive statement unless it's true. I mean, if you're going to not bank on Christianity, if you're not going to put your faith in Jesus, this would be your reason because it's just so restrictive and so narrow feeling. This might be your thing. Don't let it be because you ran into some Christians and you didn't like them. That's silly. Because you're going to always get a variety of people anywhere you go, right? So no, you've never just quit doing things because of people. People are people, but a statement like this, as far as Christianity goes, as far as your faith goes, this might be a reason. It's I don't know, that seems awful narrow to me. But Jesus continues, tries to clarify in his own way, and he says, if you really know me, you will know my Father. He says, I'm the way, and so if you know me, then you know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him, and you've seen him. From now on, you do know him, and you have seen him because you've known me. And the disciples are thinking, that's still a little confusing. There he goes. Like, he's essentially equating himself with God here. And so I think we believe that. Like, we're okay with that. I think the disciples are thinking that's good. Like, we've spent time with you. We've seen what you can do. We've heard you teach with incredible authority. We've understood things that we thought we never could. And we really do believe that you are sent from God. And so we're buying that. But we're just confused as to what it is you're saying right now. And we want to understand. And so Philip then chimes in. It's like we got Thomas, wondering. And now Philip pipes up and says, he says something that I think all of us have said, all of us have wondered, all of us have probably asked something like this at some point in our lives. Listen to what Philip says. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father and that will be enough for us. How about just prove it? I mean, haven't you said that at some point, like in some way, some form or fashion, at some point in your life, you've wondered this very thing? Why don't, instead of like being all like weird and secretive and you're going to the Father and you're going to prepare a place and y'all are going to get there one, why not just show us? You ever wanted that? I mean, it's almost like, I think we've all like kind of feel this way because like Philip we're thinking that would be enough. And I think most of us would be pretty satisfied with just being confident that God is really there. That there really is a God. Like, it's just why not just open up the veil of heaven and say, see, there he is, right there. He's there. It's like, oh, well, now I'm really confident. Now I believe. Now I understand. And it's like, I wouldn't even have to be healed of certain things. I wouldn't have to, see incredible miracles. I wouldn't have to, have my life fixed. Like, I don't think, as long as I was just confident that God was really there, that God was really for me, that God knew me by name. Like, as long as I was confident in that, like, I would be okay. And I think Philip is just saying the same thing. Just show us, and that'll be enough. Just show us. Quit, being weird and talking the way you are. Just show us. Just make this easy, would you? We've thought things like that, hadn't we? And Jesus answered, Philip, don't you know me? Don't you know me, Philip? Even after I have been among you such a long time? I mean, haven't you heard me? I've talked about this before. This isn't new information. Don't you know me? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. It's like, hold up, you're missing the whole point. You're missing the reason why I came down. You're missing the reason why you believe that God came down to us and lived among us and put on flesh and became one of us. You're missing the point. You're missing the reason. And it's because if you want to know what the Father is like, then you've got to look at me. You will never, you ready for this? You will never, this is like what he wants Philip and the disciples to hear. You will never understand and know what God is like better than by looking at me. You will know and understand God by looking at me, at who I am, at what I'm like, at what I'm doing. And it's why I'm here. I want to introduce you to your Father. And that should be enough. It's why I'm here. It's why I put on this flesh, so that you could see and you could hear. And then he follows this way. He says, the words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. In other words, Jesus is saying, they're not my words and they're not my works. They're not my words and they're not my works. So, listen to me and you'll know what the Father would say. If you want to know what God is like, then you got to look at me. If you want to know what God would say when it comes to your circumstances, if you want to know what God would think about things or how he would respond in a situation or how he would handle your money or your finances or your job or your career or your relationships, if you want to know what God thinks about those things, then listen to what I say. If you want to know how God would respond in certain situations, if you want to know what God would do, then watch what I do. Because they're not my words and they're not my works. They are my Father's. And I am demonstrating them to you, and I am communicating them to you so that you can know God. If you look at me, you won't miss your Heavenly Father. If you look at me, you won't miss your Heavenly Father. And that's what He wants for you and me. He doesn't want us to miss it. He wants us to look in the right direction. In other words, He's basically saying Jesus came to reveal what God is like through His words and His works. Jesus came, like if you want to know, like if you had to narrow it down and you get this question, what's the point of Christmas? Like, I don't understand. And you're tempted to say, well, it's Christ and the baby Jesus. And, you're imagining something like that. Instead, think of this. The reason we celebrate Christmas is because God came down to us in order to reveal Himself to us through the works and the words of Jesus. That's why. Because up to this point, all they had was information. All they had were stories. They didn't have a lot to go on. They didn't have any kind of physical manifestation, any kind of appearance. They didn't really know, like, what are the nuts and bolts? What are the day-to-day? What is it like to get up in the morning and go to bed at night? And what does this really look like? And Jesus came because God was not going to be satisfied with just sending us some information. It wasn't an email. It wasn't a quick text. Here, well, I'm like this. Instead, He sent Himself. He came down to us. And He revealed Himself to us in order to communicate something. If you want to know what God is like, then look to Jesus. The problem is that we don't do this, do we? We have a tendency, and this is what I don't want us to do today. This is what I don't want us to do over the holiday season. This is what wonder is going to be required in order to avoid this. But we all look at the wrong things. Things that kind of give us glimpses of who God is, but not the full picture. Things that always fall short, things that are limited in their ability to show us and reveal God to us. Things like our circumstances. We look to our circumstances. And really, it's our ability to interpret our circumstances, isn't it? And aren't we pretty terrible at that? I mean, if we're being real honest, how many times have you looked at the same circumstance and it seems to have changed the way your perspective is on it as time passes? At one point, something that seemed like really terrible and horrible and the end of the world, like, you lost your job, or when you were young, you had to, move schools, or maybe you had to move states. And at the time, you were like, God is horrible. He doesn't answer prayers. He does not love me. And then you got older and you grew wiser and you began to look back, and you've got stories like this, and you realize now that actually shaped you. And had I not moved, well, this wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have met so-and-so, and now we're married and happily ever after. And thank God, and it's like, which is right? Like, which one's right? How do we know we're right? Think about the results of this past political season that we just went through. Do you know that we actually have well-meaning, God-fearing, Jesus-loving Christians on both sides of the argument? That both believe that God answered their prayers? Who's right? Who's right? Seriously, who gets to be right? We're not real good. The bottom line is we're not real good at interpreting circumstances and allowing circumstances to reveal something about the nature of God and what God is like. It's limited. We can provide glimpses, oh, well, that was such a God moment. That was such a God thing. That's kind of how we say, it's like, oh, the parking spot. Thank you, God. It's like, does that really reveal anything about the nature of God? It's like, well, what about when you didn't get the parking spot? God, you hate me. Thank you so much. Does He? Like, oh, great, it's raining as soon as I'm going in. God, obviously God is not, He hates me today. Oh, thank God it stopped raining when I came into church. Oh, that was such a God moment. I prayed for that on the way. It's like, really? I just think we're not real good at interpreting circumstances because we're human. And so it falls short. It's incomplete. We look at religious traditions, don't we? Other religions, and every religion has its own version of truth and what it emphasizes as the most important things, and, you're supposed to believe this and do this and act this way, and there's somebody else, and it's like, no, it's believe this and do this and act this way and say these things and do this at certain times. No, it's, worship on Saturday. No, it's worship on Sunday. No, it's never, have music in church. Oh, no, it's, get baptized, it's don't get baptized, like who's right? We can't all be right. That's the real problem. We can't all be right. So who's right and who's wrong? Because here's what religion does. Religion and religious traditions, they ultimately are trying to offer us answers because we like answers. We want to know, yes, no, right, wrong. Like we just want to know. Like give us the answers and that's what we'll go with. But who's to say that the way they have crystallized and formalized, their understanding and their belief, who's to say that they've done it correctly? Who's to say that they've gotten it all right? It's like, well, I don't know. It falls short, doesn't it? Even religion falls short to some degree. And so some of us take it upon ourselves to look inside ourselves. It's like, well, it's just me, like it's my interpretation. It's what I feel like. I'm going to look to my inner self to reveal something. And there's there's something there, the Spirit that lives within us, and there's some understanding that we can have. But don't you know, come on, let's be for real, that what is in you, that looking within you is limited to what's already within you. Looking to your inner self is limited to what is in your inner self. Let me describe it this way. Don't you know that the inner self of a 16-year-old interprets things differently than the inner self of that same 16-year-old who becomes a 30-year-old? Like they just see things differently now. And then when they're 40 and when they're 50. So at which point were they correct when they looked within themselves? It's like, well, they understood things differently when they were 16 than when they were 40. So which was right? Well, it's, maybe some, maybe a little bit, maybe all, maybe both. But ultimately it's limited. And we understand this, right? It lacks something. We can't rely on that. Even nature. We look to nature. It's like, well, I just want to lay out and look at the stars and see fireballs across the sky. And that just shows me how big God is. But at the end of the day, really, that definitely is a glimpse. Man, you look at the masterpiece that creation is, and it's amazing. But the problem with nature is that it's natural, which means it's explainable. At the end of the day, it's explainable. And this is what happened to some of you. You went to college and you had that professor, or, somebody that like explained away all of the unexplainable things you thought you knew. And all of a sudden it was like, well, hold up. There's no wonder in that anymore. Because now I understand it all. What was amazing and mesmerizing now is just kind of, And it's because it's natural. It just is, it's explainable, it's comprehensible, it's understandable, and therefore it lacks something for us. And it ultimately doesn't fulfill. Yes, you can learn something about the Creator by looking at His creation, but it is limited. It's limited. And here's the thing. This is what I don't want you to miss as we wrap up. If you are leaning on those things to discover and learn and figure out what God is like, then at some point along the way, eventually, it will fall short and you will lose the wonder that was once within you. You will. You won't look at God the same way because you won't interpret God correctly. You will miss something about who He is. Because you know how it is. Like, well, I lean into my, religious traditions and the way that we do things, or my circumstances, and I try to figure them out. But then when things don't go right, or religion fails us in some way, like they didn't handle a divorce well, or they didn't handle, your younger sister getting pregnant, out of wedlock as a teenager. They didn't handle that very well, the way that you expected. And so like everything seems to fall short and fail you as far as what you thought about God because of those things. And at that point, wonder gets sucked out of us. And we stop asking questions, and we stop being curious, and we get to a season like Christmas, and we lose the wonder altogether, and we don't even want to know. We don't ask questions. And Jesus would say, it's because you're not looking at me. And if you're not looking at me, then you're going to miss the Father. To approach the Father with wonder is to wonder about His Son. To approach God with wonder is to wonder about His Son. That's why Jesus came. It's why we believe that God came down to us, because there were eyewitnesses that recorded it, and they didn't want us to miss it. It's like they're echoing through the generations saying, don't miss it. The way that you know about God is by looking at Jesus. It's why we wrote all this stuff down in as much detail as we could possibly remember. We wrote these events down and we recorded them, and God has preserved them now for 2,000 years because we don't want you to miss it. And I don't want you to miss it. Have you, this is the question, have you wondered about the Son lately? Like before you're getting in, like you've probably already decorated and you've got Christmas, lovely blinking Christmas trees. You've got things up and Christmas music is going, and you're thinking about Christmas plans, and man, and it's so easy to miss, right? I mean, I've always heard that. Don't miss Christmas, don't miss the true meaning of Christmas. But I've always wondered, like, how? Okay, like, I think about it real hard. Like, that's what I used to. It's like, I'm loving Christmas. It's like, here's what we're missing. If you want to not miss it, then look once again to the Son. Wonder, could it be true? Could it be true that God really came down to us? Could it be true that He really sent His Son to us? Could it be true that God put on flesh and lived with us in order to reveal what God is like to us? Let me pray for you. If you have not done that yet this year, and you just haven't really wondered, you've thought some about it, and you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and you believe these things, and you come to church, and you serve, but maybe you haven't paused long enough to really wonder, would you do that today? And for some of you, it may just have been a moment of skepticism because you were looking in the wrong places. And I want to give you an opportunity to wonder about Jesus, maybe for the first time. Just pray these words with me right where you are. Just say, Jesus, I want to look to you. I trust that you came down to us in order to show me what God is like. And I want to look to you and to listen to you and to watch you and to know you. Because when I know you, I realize now I know the Father. And I thank you for that. And I pray that I would not miss that this season. And that I wouldn't miss it ever again. That I would never lose the wonder, the beautiful gift of wonder within me. I offer you my life. And I ask you to walk with me and to lead me along the way. And I pray this in the matchless name of Jesus. Amen.